"You are small for me," the giant said to the lone cowboy. And he said, "I'm big down there." The lone cowboy rode across the wide-open land as the sun slowly climbed into the sky. The morning air was cool and fresh, and the sound of the wind moving through the tall grass followed him like a quiet song. His horse walked at a steady pace, and the cowboy sat straight in the saddle, eyes focused on the far line where the land met the sky. He had been on the road for many days, moving from one small town to another, helping where he could and earning just enough to keep going. His clothes were worn, his boots dusty, and his hat had a small tear at the edge, but he carried himself with a calm and steady confidence. People often looked at him and thought he was weak. He was not tall, and his frame was thin from long days of travel and simple meals. Some townsfolk whispered that he would not last long on the wild roads. Others laughed quietly when they saw him walk into a place filled with larger, louder men. But the cowboy never let their words touch his heart. He knew what he had faced in his life. He knew the long nights, the empty roads, and the hard choices that had shaped him into who he was. That morning he reached a small town near the edge of the plains. The buildings were old and the paint on the walls had faded under the strong sun. A few people stood outside the general store talking in low voices. When they noticed a cowboy, their conversation stopped. One of them, a woman with tired eyes and a worried face, stepped forward.
"You should not go toward the mountains," she said. "A giant lives there."
"He claims the land as his own. He scares travelers and keeps people away from the water near the valley." The cowboy listened carefully. He thanked her for the warning and asked more questions. The people shared stories of a tall figure seen near the cliffs, of shadows that moved across the fields, and of deep footsteps that shook the ground. Some said the giant was cruel. Others said he was just lonely and angry at the world.
The cowboy felt something stir inside him.
It was not fear. It was not pride. It was a quiet feeling that told him this was a road he needed to walk. He did not speak about it to anyone. He simply nodded, bought a small bag of food, filled his water bottle, and stepped back outside. Before leaving, he sat on a wooden bench near the edge of town and wrote a short note on a piece of paper. He left it with the woman who had warned him. It said that if he did not return, he hoped the town would remember that even a small person could walk a brave path. The woman looked at him with a mix of worry and respect as he mounted his horse and turned toward the distant mountains. The land slowly changed as he rode. The grass grew shorter, the ground became rougher, and the wind grew stronger. The sky above him seemed wider and heavier, as if it was watching his every move. He rode through narrow paths between large rocks and crossed shallow streams that reflected his face in the water. Each time he looked down, he saw a man who was tired but determined, unsure but steady. As the sun moved higher, he took a break under the shade of a lone tree. He fed his horse, drank some water, and closed his eyes for a moment. His mind drifted back to his past. He remembered the small farm where he had grown up, the long days of work, and the simple lessons his parents had taught him. They had always said that strength was not about being the biggest or the loudest. It was about being kind, being honest, and standing up when something felt wrong. Those words stayed with him as he stood up and continued his journey. By late afternoon, he reached the edge of the valley near the mountains. The air felt different there, heavier and colder. The land was quiet in a way that made every sound seem louder. The cowboy heard the soft crunch of his boots on the gravel and the steady breathing of his horse. He felt small in that wide, silent place, but he did not turn back. Then he saw a movement near the cliffs. A tall shadow rose from behind a large rock. The ground trembled slightly as a giant figure stepped into the open. The giant was broad and strong, with long arms and a face that looked both curious and stern. His eyes narrowed as he looked down at the cowboy. "You are small for me," the giant said in a deep, slow voice that echoed across the valley. The cowboy felt his heart beat faster, but he did not let fear control him. He stood straight, took a slow breath, and looked up at the giant. His voice was calm when he spoke. "I may look small," he said, "but what I carry inside is not." The giant stared at him, surprised by the cowboy's steady tone. He expected shouting or running, not quiet confidence. The air between them felt tense, like a string pulled tight. The giant took a step closer, and the cowboy's horse shifted nervously. The cowboy placed a gentle hand on the horse's neck to calm it. He did not reach for any weapon. He did not raise his voice. He simply waited. The giant circled him slowly, studying him from every angle. "Why did you come here?" the giant asked. The cowboy thought for a moment before answering. "I came because people are afraid," he said. "They say you keep them from the water and the land." "I wanted to see for myself." The giant's face hardened. "This land is mine," he said. "I was alone here long before they came." The cowboy nodded. "I know what it feels like to be alone," he said softly. The giant paused. The wind moved between them, carrying dust and the smell of stone. For the first time, the giant did not look angry. He looked uncertain. The cowboy took a small step forward. "I'm not here to take anything from you," he said. "I just want to understand." The giant looked down at him for a long moment. Then he stepped back and pointed toward a narrow path that led deeper into the valley. "Follow," he said. The cowboy hesitated only for a second before leading his horse along the path. The giant walked beside him, his steps slow and heavy. They moved past tall rocks and deep shadows, into a place where the sunlight barely reached the ground. As they walked, the giant spoke of how he had been driven away from other lands because people feared him. He spoke of building a home in the valley and wanting to protect it from anyone who might harm it. The cowboy listened without interrupting, his eyes taking in every detail of the path and the walls of stone around them. They reached a clearing where a small stream ran through the rocks. The water was clear and cool. The giant stopped and looked at it. "This is why I stay here," he said. "This water keeps me alive." The cowboy knelt and touched the water with his fingers. "People need this too," he said. "Not to take it all, just to live." The giant said nothing. He stared at the stream, then at the cowboy, as if seeing him in a new way. The sun began to lower in the sky, casting long shadows across the clearing. The air grew quiet again, but it no longer felt heavy. It felt open, like something new was about to begin. The cowboy stood up, brushed the dust from his knees, and looked at the giant. "I don't know how this will end," he said, "but I know that walking away won't fix anything." The giant let out a slow breath. "You are different from the others," he said. The cowboy gave a small, simple smile. "We all are," he replied. As the first stars appeared in the sky, the two stood there in the fading light, not as enemies, but as two beings trying to find their place in a wide and often unkind world. The valley, the mountains, and the quiet stream around them seemed to listen, holding their moment in silence, waiting to see what would come next. The next morning the cowboy woke to the soft light of the sun filtering through the tall rocks. The valley was quiet, and the stream nearby gurgled softly as if nothing had changed. But the cowboy knew that nothing would ever feel quite the same after meeting the giant. He had felt the weight of someone so much larger than him, yet also sensed that beneath that strength there was a heart and a mind capable of understanding. He stretched, feeling the soreness from the long ride the day before, but the excitement of what lay ahead pushed him forward. The giant was already awake, standing near the stream, gazing at the water with deep concentration. The cowboy approached slowly, making no sudden movements. The giant turned and gave a small nod, acknowledging him without a word. There was no hostility in the gesture, only quiet recognition. For the cowboy, this was progress. Small, subtle, but real. "You are ready to walk more today?" the giant said, his voice still slow and steady, echoing slightly against the cliffs. The cowboy nodded. "Yes. I want to understand your land. I want to see why it matters so much." The giant studied him as if measuring the honesty in his words. Then, without another comment, he turned and began walking toward a narrow path that led deeper into the mountains. The cowboy followed, careful to match his pace, which was slower than he expected. The path was rough and steep, lined with loose stones that threatened to slide underfoot. He leaned on his horse, keeping a steady grip on the reins, feeling both nervous and determined. As they climbed higher, the giant began to speak, sharing pieces of his life. He told the cowboy how he had come to this valley many years ago, when he had been forced away from lands where he had once lived. He spoke of towns that rejected him, of people who laughed at his size and feared him. The cowboy listened quietly, understanding the loneliness that came from being different in a world that only valued conformity. "I was alone for a long time," the giant said. "No one dared come near."
I thought I would always be this way. Then you appeared.
The cowboy smiled softly. "I am not like the others. I don't see your size, only your struggle." The giant looked at him, eyes narrowing slightly. He was not used to anyone speaking so calmly to him, not used to someone not being afraid. The cowboy felt a subtle shift in the air, a sense that the giant was reconsidering his first impressions. It was a small victory, but an important one. As they continued their journey, the terrain grew rougher. They crossed a shallow river, the water cold against the cowboy's boots, and climbed over rocks that seemed almost too big to step on safely. At one point, the cowboy slipped, and his horse stumbled as well. The giant caught both the man and the horse, steadying them with surprising gentleness for someone so large. "Careful," the giant said. "This path is not easy." "I know," the cowboy replied, "but nothing worth seeing is ever easy." The giant grunted in agreement, and they moved forward. By midday, they reached a rocky plateau that overlooked the valley. From here, the cowboy could see the small town he had passed the day before, the tiny buildings appearing almost toy-like from this height. The stream snaked through the valley below, glinting in the sunlight. The giant stood beside him, silent, watching the view. "You see what I protect," the giant said finally. "This valley is all I have. These rocks, this water, these paths, they are my life. I cannot let anyone harm them."
"I understand," the cowboy said. "It's a responsibility, not a privilege."
"You care for it, and that is why it is strong." The giant was quiet for a moment, then turned his gaze to the cowboy. "You are small, but you walk with courage. That is rare." The cowboy shrugged slightly, though inside he felt proud. "Courage is not measured by size," he said. "It's measured by action, by standing when others would run." The giant looked at him, and for the first time there was a trace of respect in his expression. The cowboy felt it, though he said nothing. Words were not needed for this understanding. As they descended from the plateau toward a narrow canyon, the giant decided to test the cowboy further.
"We will cross the canyon," he said. "You must follow my steps carefully."
One wrong move could be dangerous. The cowboy nodded, gripping the reins tightly. The path was narrow and steep, the walls of the canyon rising high above them. Rocks jutted out, making it difficult for the horse to find safe footing. The giant went first, placing each step with care, demonstrating how to maintain balance. The cowboy followed, careful to match the movements, each step a lesson in patience and observation. Halfway across, a small rock shifted beneath the cowboy's boot. His heart leapt, but before he could panic, the giant reached out a massive hand and steadied him. The cowboy took a deep breath and continued, feeling a mixture of fear and trust. The giant's strength was undeniable, but so was his willingness to help, not dominate. When they reached the other side, the cowboy exhaled slowly. "Thank you," he said quietly. The giant nodded, not offering more words than necessary.
Actions had spoken enough.
They camped in a small clearing later that evening. The giant gathered firewood with surprising speed, stacking logs carefully while the cowboy prepared a simple meal of bread, dried meat, and water. The giant watched him, curious about the small rituals of someone so different from him.
"You eat simply," the giant observed. "Yes," the cowboy said.
"It is enough, and I want to keep moving tomorrow so I do not carry more than I need." The giant considered this, then looked at the stars beginning to appear above the canyon walls. "I never had someone like you beside me," he said. "Someone who walks without fear, who speaks without weakness." The cowboy smiled faintly. "I am not without fear," he said. I just do not let it control me. The giant nodded slowly. There was a quiet understanding in the air now, something that had not been there yesterday. The tension had eased, replaced by curiosity and respect. The cowboy could see that the giant was thinking deeply, perhaps questioning the old ways he had lived alone in the valley. That night, the cowboy lay under the stars, thinking about the day's journey. The path had been dangerous, the mountain cliffs unforgiving, and the giant unpredictable. Yet he had learned more about courage, strength, and understanding than he had in all his days traveling through the towns. He realized that the giant was not an enemy, and he was not small in the eyes of those who mattered. The next morning, the cowboy rose early again. He felt stronger, more confident, and ready for whatever the giant would ask of him. He was aware that the days ahead would test him further, that challenges would grow, and that both he and the giant would have to learn from one another to survive. As he stepped into the morning light, the giant appeared beside him. "Today we go higher," he said. "The path is harder. You must rely on more than courage. You must rely on wit, patience, and trust." The cowboy nodded, gripping the reins, and followed the giant into the mountains. The cliffs rose sharply around them, the wind cutting cold against their faces. Every step was deliberate. Every move required focus. Along the way, the cowboy noticed small things: the way the wind shifted, the sounds of birds hidden in crevices, the movement of clouds above. He realized that surviving in the valley was about more than strength. It was about observation, understanding, and harmony with the land. By midday, they reached a ledge overlooking another part of the valley. The giant stopped and gestured for the cowboy to look. "See this?" he asked. "This is why I protect the land. Every small stream, every rock, every tree matters. They all play a role." The cowboy studied the scene, amazed at the delicate balance of nature. "I see it," he said, "and I understand why you cannot let anything happen to it." The giant's expression softened, and the cowboy sensed that the first real walls between them had started to fall. Respect was growing into trust. As the sun began to dip toward the horizon, they set camp on the ledge. The cowboy prepared a simple meal again, and the giant watched quietly, still large and imposing, yet strangely gentle. The cowboy reflected on the day and realized that this journey was not just about proving courage or understanding the giant. It was about learning patience, empathy, and the true meaning of strength. That night, as the stars spread across the sky and the valley below lay in shadow, the cowboy felt a quiet satisfaction. He had faced challenges, learned from the giant, and survived. Tomorrow would bring new tests, and the unknown still stretched ahead. But for the first time, he felt that he was not walking alone in this world, no matter how large or small the beings around him might be. The cowboy closed his eyes, listening to the distant sound of the stream, the wind through the rocks, and the steady breathing of the giant beside him. He slept lightly, ready for the lessons that tomorrow would bring. The morning light spilled over the cliffs as the cowboy opened his eyes. The valley lay quiet, wrapped in soft gold and shadows. He took a deep breath, feeling the crisp mountain air fill his lungs. The journey so far had tested his courage, his patience, and his resolve, but he had grown stronger with each step. Beside him, the giant stirred, stretching his massive arms. The sheer size of the giant was still overwhelming, yet the cowboy had grown accustomed to it. He now saw the giant as more than a figure of fear. He saw him as a companion in this journey through the wild and untamed land. The giant looked at the cowboy with a steady gaze. "Today will test more than your courage," he said. "The path ahead is dangerous. It will require your mind, your strength, and your understanding." The cowboy nodded, his hand resting lightly on the reins of his horse. "I am ready," he replied. The words felt true in his heart. He was ready for the challenges that the day would bring. They began climbing toward a higher ridge. The rocks here were sharper, uneven, and jagged. Loose gravel crunched under the horse's hooves. Every step required focus, and the cowboy felt the strain in his legs, his hands gripping the reins tighter than ever. The giant moved beside him, silent at first, his heavy footsteps steadying the ground around them. As they climbed, the giant shared more of his life, his voice calm and reflective. He spoke of the loneliness he had felt as a child, how people had laughed at his size and driven him away from towns where he had hoped to belong. The cowboy listened carefully, understanding that the giant's strength had been shaped by hardship, by rejection, and by years of solitude. It was not just his body that was strong, it was his mind, honed by experience and patience. "You are unlike anyone I have met," the giant said quietly. "Most people fear me, most run away, but you walk forward." The cowboy smiled faintly. "I have learned that running solves nothing. Sometimes the only way forward is to face what scares you." The giant nodded thoughtfully. Wise words, few understand that. They reached a narrow ledge that jutted out over a steep drop. The wind howled through the canyon, tugging at their clothing and pulling at their hair. The cowboy's horse shifted nervously, sensing the danger of the ledge. The giant stepped forward, demonstrating how to keep balance while moving along the cliff's edge. "Follow my steps," the giant instructed. "Do not rush. One misstep could be fatal." The cowboy followed carefully, each step measured and precise. His heart pounded, and he felt a rush of adrenaline with every movement. Halfway along, a loose stone slipped beneath his boot. The horse shied slightly, and the cowboy felt himself teetering dangerously. But the giant reached out a massive hand, steadying him with ease. "Trust," the giant said simply. "Trust is as important as strength." The cowboy nodded, understanding the deeper meaning. Strength alone would not guide him through this journey. He had to rely on observation, patience, and a calm mind. After crossing the ledge safely, they reached a plateau where a small herd of mountain deer grazed quietly. The cowboy paused to watch, marveling at the grace and gentleness of the creatures in contrast to the harshness of the cliffs around them. The giant watched too, but he did not speak. The silence between them carried understanding. Life in this valley was delicate, and every step mattered. They continued higher into the mountains. The sun climbed to its peak, casting sharp shadows across the rocky terrain. The giant led them through a series of steep passes, testing the cowboy's endurance and focus. At one point they came across a deep crevice. The gap was wide, and the cowboy felt a shiver run down his spine. "How do we cross?" he asked, his voice steady despite the unease in his heart. "Carefully," the giant replied. "Step by step, and do not let fear control you." The cowboy studied the crevice. There were rocks jutting out at different intervals, forming a natural bridge if crossed with caution. He measured each distance, took a deep breath, and began moving forward. The giant followed beside him, providing guidance when needed, never rushing, never pressuring. Halfway across, the horse hesitated, and the cowboy had to adjust quickly, balancing himself while keeping calm. The giant's massive hand was there in an instant, steadying both man and horse. They reached the other side safely, and the cowboy exhaled, feeling a wave of relief and pride. "You are learning well," the giant said, a hint of admiration in his voice. "Most would have faltered. Most would have turned back." The cowboy smiled, though sweat dripped from his brow. "I have to keep moving. There is more to see, more to learn." They pressed on, reaching a ridge that overlooked the entire valley. From here, the cowboy could see the town, the streams, and the paths he had traveled. The view was breathtaking. He felt a sense of accomplishment, having crossed dangerous paths and learned lessons of patience, courage, and resilience. The giant spoke quietly, almost to himself. "This valley has tested me for years. It has made me strong, but it has also made me wary. You, small one, have shown me that there is another way. Strength is not only in the body, it is in the heart, in the mind, in the willingness to walk forward even when the path is uncertain." The cowboy looked at him, understanding fully. He realized that this journey was not only about proving himself, it was about teaching the giant that trust, patience, and wisdom were just as important as power. As the afternoon sun began to descend, clouds gathered over the cliffs. A storm was approaching. The wind picked up, carrying a sharp chill that cut through the canyon. The giant and the cowboy knew they needed shelter quickly. They found a small cave tucked into the side of the mountain, just large enough for them and the horse.
Inside, they prepared for the storm. The giant moved rocks to block the wind while the cowboy started a small fire, careful not to let the flames escape the cave. As the rain began to fall outside, tapping against the rocks, the cowboy sat by the fire and shared stories from his life. He spoke of the towns he had passed, the people he had helped, and the lessons he had learned along the way. The giant listened, occasionally nodding, occasionally asking questions.
"You are not like others," the giant said.
"You see value in things I have long forgotten. You see people, not just their fears."
The cowboy nodded. "Everyone has a story. Everyone has a place. Even someone big or someone small must find theirs." The giant was silent for a long while.
The sound of rain filled the cave, mingling with the crackle of the fire. Outside, the storm raged, but inside, there was a sense of calm. The cowboy and the giant sat side by side, two very different beings connected by respect, understanding, and shared experience. When the storm passed, the valley was quiet again. Puddles shimmered in the fading light, and the air smelled fresh and clean. The cowboy and the giant emerged from the cave, stepping carefully over wet rocks. The path ahead was still challenging, but the cowboy felt ready. He had learned to trust not only the giant but also himself, his instincts, and his courage. As they descended toward a lower ridge, the giant stopped and looked at him. "You are strong, even when you appear small. You have learned well today." The cowboy smiled. "Thank you. I have learned from you too. Strength is not always what it seems. Sometimes it is quiet. Sometimes it is patience. Sometimes it is seeing the world as it is and moving forward anyway." The giant's expression softened. For the first time, there was no mockery, no judgment, only respect and understanding. The cowboy felt a surge of pride, not from his size, but from his journey, from the lessons he had learned, and from the bond forming between them. The sun set over the cliffs, casting long shadows across the valley. The cowboy and the giant set camp for the night, the fire warming them as the stars began to appear above. The cowboy reflected on the day. He had faced dangerous paths, braved storms, and learned more about courage, strength, and patience than he had ever known. The giant, too, had begun to see the world in a new way, guided by the quiet wisdom of the small cowboy beside him. As the night grew darker, the cowboy lay under the stars, listening to the gentle sounds of the valley, the stream, the rustle of distant wildlife, and the soft breathing of the giant beside him. He realized that this journey was far from over, but he also understood that every step, every lesson, and every moment mattered. Courage was not measured by size or power, but by the willingness to face the unknown, to keep moving forward, and to respect those who walk beside you. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new lessons, and perhaps new dangers. But the cowboy was ready. He had survived the cliffs, the storm, and the test of courage. He had proven to himself, and to the giant, that even someone who appeared small could walk a path of greatness, guided by heart, mind, and spirit. The next morning the sky was clear, but a sense of urgency hung in the air. The cowboy rose early, feeling the stiffness in his muscles from the previous day's climb. He stretched carefully, taking in the view of the valley below. The sun reflected off the distant stream, sparkling like tiny diamonds scattered across the earth. The giant stirred beside him, massive and still imposing, yet there was a calm in his presence that comforted the cowboy. "Today we go deeper into the mountains," the giant said, his deep voice echoing softly against the cliffs. "The path will be harder. You will need to use your mind, not just your courage." The cowboy nodded. He understood that every step forward would test him in ways he had not yet experienced. But he was ready. He had learned patience, observation, and the value of trust from the giant. And he had grown to respect the enormous being beside him, not as a foe, but as a guide, teacher, and companion. They began their ascent. The path wound steeply upward, cutting between sharp rocks and narrow ridges. Loose stones crunched underfoot, and the horse shifted nervously with each careful step. The cowboy felt the strain in his arms and legs, but he pressed on, focusing on each movement, each breath. As they climbed, the giant spoke. The upper cliffs are not just difficult to cross, they are also home to dangers. Strong winds, hidden drops, and wildlife that sees travelers as threats. You must stay alert. The cowboy listened carefully, understanding that every word was advice shaped by years of experience. He kept his eyes on the path, scanning for obstacles and planning his steps. Slowly, the duo moved higher, their silhouettes stretching against the sky as the wind whipped around them. At midday, they reached a plateau where the land opened into a small natural clearing. A herd of mountain goats grazed quietly, moving gracefully across the jagged rocks. The cowboy paused to watch them, amazed by their balance and poise in such a difficult place. The giant stood silently, watching too, though his eyes held a new warmth. It was the first time the cowboy had seen the giant not as a force of nature, but as a being capable of admiration and wonder.
"You see life in even the smallest places," the giant said quietly.
"Most come here only to conquer, not to observe." The cowboy smiled. "Strength is not always about conquest. It is about understanding and respect." The giant nodded. "You are teaching me patience and observation, lessons I thought I had forgotten." They continued their climb. As the sun moved westward, the wind grew stronger, carrying a chill that bit at the cowboy's skin. The giant paused and looked at him. "The storm will come soon. We must find shelter before the cliffs are dangerous." The cowboy scanned the rocks ahead. He noticed a small cave partially hidden behind jagged stones. It was not large, but it would protect them from the wind and rain. He pointed it out to the giant. The giant studied it carefully. "It will do," he said. "Quickly, we move before the storm grows stronger." They reached the cave just as dark clouds gathered above. The first drops of rain fell, cold and heavy, pattering against the rocks. Inside, the cowboy worked quickly, starting a small fire while the giant moved rocks to block the strongest gusts of wind. The horse huddled close, sensing the shelter. As the storm raged outside, the cowboy and the giant sat near the fire. The roar of the wind was constant and thunder echoed through the cliffs. Yet inside the cave there was a strange sense of calm. The cowboy broke the silence first. "This storm is strong," he said, "but we have made it here safely. That is what matters." The giant nodded. "Yes. But strength alone would not have brought us here. Your careful steps, your observation, your patience, all of that mattered." The cowboy looked at him. "We learn from each other. Strength is not only in power, it is in wisdom, courage, and respect." The giant's massive hand rested near the fire, almost touching the cowboy's. It was not a gesture of dominance, but of quiet companionship. The cowboy felt a warmth in his chest, a recognition that their bond had deepened. The storm continued for hours. Rain poured outside, washing the rocks and paths they had crossed. The cowboy shared stories of his life, of the small towns he had traveled through, and of the people he had helped. The giant listened intently, asking questions at times, revealing parts of himself he had never shared with anyone before. He spoke of the loneliness he had endured, of the fear others had of him, and of the longing to belong somewhere. "You have a courage I did not expect," the giant said. "Most would have turned back, frightened by my size or the challenges of this land."
The cowboy shook his head.
"Courage is not about fearlessness, it is about moving forward despite fear. I have learned that from traveling alone, and now from walking with you." The giant was silent for a long moment. The wind outside howled like a living thing, yet inside the cave there was a sense of peace. They sat together, watching the firelight dance across the walls. The cowboy could see the thoughtfulness in the giant's eyes, the contemplation of a being who had lived alone for too long and now saw the value of partnership and trust.
As night fell, the storm began to ease.
The rain softened and the wind calmed. Outside, the valley lay washed and glistening under the first light of the moon peeking through the clouds. The cowboy and the giant emerged from the cave, stepping carefully over wet rocks. The horse followed closely, its hooves slipping slightly on the slick stone. The giant looked at the valley below. "We have survived the storm," he said. "Few would have. You have proven your courage once again." The cowboy smiled. "We survived together. Strength is not only about one person. It is about working together, using every skill and lesson we have." The giant's expression softened. "You have opened my eyes to something I had forgotten. Even a small person can change the path of events with determination and wisdom." The cowboy felt a sense of pride, not from his own accomplishments but from the growing bond between him and the giant. They had faced the cliffs, the wind, the storm, and each other's differences, and had come through stronger and wiser. As they descended from the plateau toward a lower ridge, the valley stretched before them, quiet and beautiful under the moonlight. The streams shimmered, and the small town appeared tiny from the distance. The cowboy realized how far they had come, both physically and emotionally. He had faced fear, danger, and uncertainty, yet he had also learned trust, patience, and understanding. The giant spoke quietly, almost to himself. "I have protected this land for years, thinking only of strength. But strength alone is not enough. You, small one, have taught me that courage, patience, and respect are just as important." The cowboy nodded. "We all have something to learn. Even those who seem the strongest have lessons to discover, and even the smallest person can make a difference." They set camp for the night near a gentle slope, the fire casting long shadows on the rocks. The cowboy prepared a simple meal, sharing some with the giant and the horse. The giant watched quietly, occasionally speaking to ask questions about the towns and people the cowboy had known. He listened with interest, curiosity, and, at times, admiration. That night, as the stars shone above, the cowboy lay under the open sky. The air smelled of wet earth and fresh grass. He reflected on the day's journey, the storm, and the lessons learned. He thought about the giant who had begun to see the world differently because of a small cowboy's courage and wisdom. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, perhaps even greater than the cliffs and the storm. Yet the cowboy felt ready. He had grown, learned, and proven not only to the giant, but also to himself that courage, patience, and respect could overcome fear and danger. The giant lay beside him, silent but watchful. The cowboy realized that they had become partners, in a strange, quiet way. Two very different beings, learning from each other, trusting each other, and facing the vastness of the mountains together. As sleep took him, the cowboy felt a sense of peace. He knew that tomorrow, new paths and challenges would appear, but he also knew that he was no longer walking alone. Strength was not measured by size alone, nor by power. It was measured by courage, patience, understanding, and the willingness to walk forward side by side with those you respect. The wind carried a soft whisper through the valley, and the cowboy closed his eyes, ready for the lessons and adventures the next day would bring. The next morning the sky was painted in shades of pink and gold as the sun rose over the valley. The cowboy awoke first, feeling the familiar stiffness in his muscles, but also a growing sense of purpose. The previous days had been challenging, yet they had strengthened him in ways he could hardly measure. He rose quietly, careful not to disturb the giant, who lay asleep nearby, massive in size but calm in presence. The cowboy stepped outside the small clearing where they had camped. The valley stretched below, peaceful in the early light, but he knew that danger could come swiftly in the mountains. He took a deep breath, feeling the fresh morning air fill his lungs. Today would be the most important day of their journey.
The giant stirred, stretching slowly, and looked down at the cowboy.
"Today we face the test," he said. "The valley will demand more than courage. It will demand trust, patience, and unity. Are you ready?" The cowboy nodded.
"I am ready. Whatever comes, we will face it together."
The giant gave a low rumble of approval and gestured toward a narrow canyon that led into the heart of the mountain. The path ahead was steep, treacherous, and lined with jagged rocks. But the cowboy felt no fear. He had learned from the giant that courage was not the absence of fear, but the decision to move forward despite it. They began their ascent. The rocks beneath their feet were loose, and every step required careful observation. The horse followed faithfully, sensing the cowboy's confidence and the giant's watchful presence. The wind howled around them stronger than it had in days past, yet the duo moved steadily, their steps deliberate and coordinated. As they climbed, the giant spoke quietly. "This canyon is home to more than just the wind and rocks. Animals, hidden cliffs, and sudden storms have tested travelers for centuries. You must trust me, and I must trust you. Only then will we succeed." The cowboy listened carefully. "I understand. Trust is more important than strength." They reached a narrow ledge barely wide enough for the horse to step safely. The cowboy's heart raced, but he remembered all the lessons from the previous days: patience, careful observation, and steady breathing. He guided the horse along the edge, taking each step slowly. The giant moved beside them, steadying the ground with his massive steps, yet allowing the cowboy to take the lead where necessary. Suddenly, a loose rock tumbled down from above, striking the cliff face and sending a small cascade of stones toward them. The cowboy reacted instinctively, moving the horse to the side while the giant extended his enormous hand to block the falling debris. They passed through safely, but the moment reminded them both of the danger that surrounded them. The path widened slightly, and they continued, emerging into a hidden clearing. Here, the valley opened up in a way neither had seen before. A small stream ran through the center, surrounded by clusters of trees and patches of soft grass. It was beautiful, almost magical, yet it also held peril. The stream had carved deep channels into the rock, and the surrounding cliffs were sharp and steep. "This is the heart of the valley," the giant said. "Many have tried to reach it, but few have succeeded. Today you will prove yourself, not to me, but to yourself and to the land." The cowboy studied the clearing. He realized that this was more than a test of courage. It was a test of teamwork, trust, and understanding. Every step they took would need to be measured. Every decision could affect the outcome. They moved forward, navigating the rocky terrain and the shallow channels of the stream. The horse carefully placed its hooves on stable rocks, guided by the cowboy's calm instructions. The giant followed closely, using his immense strength to steady rocks that threatened to shift and block their path. As they reached the center of the clearing, a sudden wind swept through, stronger than before. The horse shivered, and the cowboy had to steady it with both hands. A small landslide of stones began on the far cliff, heading toward the stream. The giant reacted immediately, using his strength to block the falling debris and protect the cowboy and the horse. "You are brave," the giant said, breathing heavily from the effort. "But now you must use your mind, not just courage."
The cowboy surveyed the area.
He noticed that a narrow path of rocks, partially submerged in the stream, could serve as a safe route across the clearing. He guided the horse carefully, teaching it to step lightly on the stones. The giant followed, helping to move unstable rocks and clearing the path. Halfway across, the horse slipped slightly, but the cowboy's steady hand and calm voice guided it to safety. The giant's massive hand hovered nearby, ready to assist but allowing the cowboy to lead. The balance between them was perfect: trust, patience, and cooperation. Finally, they reached the far side of the clearing. The cowboy let out a quiet sigh of relief. The giant smiled faintly, the first real smile the cowboy had seen from him. "You have done well," the giant said. "You have proven that courage, patience, and understanding are just as important as strength. You are not small in the ways that matter." The cowboy felt a swell of pride, not from his own strength, but from the bond that had grown between him and the giant. They had faced danger, storms, treacherous cliffs, and landslides together. They had learned to rely on each other, to trust each other, and to respect each other's abilities. As the sun began to set, the valley glowed in soft golden pink. The stream shimmered, reflecting the last light of the day. The cowboy and the giant stood together, looking out over the valley they had crossed, the challenges they had faced, and the path they had completed. "This valley is safe now," the giant said quietly, "because you walked with me, because you understood more than strength, because you showed patience and courage." The cowboy smiled. "We did it together. Strength is more than size or power. It is about heart, wisdom, and trust."
The giant nodded.
For the first time, he looked truly at peace. He had spent years guarding the valley alone, believing that strength alone could protect it. Now he saw that courage, trust, and cooperation were equally powerful. The cowboy and the giant began their descent back toward the lower ridge, careful with every step, but with a sense of accomplishment and calm. The horse followed, stepping lightly and confidently, guided by the cowboy's steady hand. As they neared the edge of the valley, the small town they had passed at the beginning of the journey came into view. The people looked up, seeing the cowboy and the giant together. There was no fear in their eyes this time, only awe. The townsfolk had heard stories of the valley and the giant, but now they saw proof that strength and courage could exist together, and that even those who seemed small could make a difference. The cowboy stopped and looked back at the giant.
"You have shown me much," he said, "but you have also changed.
You are not just a guardian of the land. You are a teacher, a guide, and a friend."
The giant's eyes softened. "And you, small one, have taught me that courage is not measured by size.
You have shown me patience, wisdom, and the power of trust." Together they walked the final stretch toward the edge of the valley. The sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows and bathing the valley in warm golden light. The cowboy felt the sense of closure. He had faced his fears, learned from the giant, and proven that courage and understanding could overcome even the greatest challenges. The townspeople gathered at the edge of the valley. They had witnessed the journey, even if only from afar, and they understood the lessons it held. That courage comes in many forms, that trust and patience are as valuable as strength, and that even the smallest person can leave a lasting impact. The cowboy mounted his horse, looking one last time at the giant.
"I will never forget this journey," he said. "Nor will I," the giant replied.
"You have changed this land and changed me. You are not small. You are remarkable." As the cowboy rode back toward the town, the giant remained on the ridge, watching silently. The bond between them had been forged through trials, respect, and understanding. Both had grown, both had learned, and both had faced the challenges of the valley together. That night, the cowboy reflected on the journey. He had traveled through harsh cliffs, storms, and treacherous paths, but he had emerged stronger, wiser, and more confident than ever. He had faced a giant not just in size but in challenge, and he had learned that true courage comes from the heart. The giant, standing alone on the ridge, looked over the valley. The wind whispered through the rocks, the stream sparkled in the moonlight, and the land was peaceful once more. He knew that he had been changed by the cowboy's presence. Strength, patience, courage, and trust were now intertwined in his understanding. He smiled quietly. A giant no longer feared, but respected. In the end, the cowboy and the giant had not only survived the journey, they had grown from it. They had faced their fears, tested their courage, and built a bond that would last. The valley was safe, the townspeople inspired, and the lessons of the journey would echo for years to come. As the stars filled the sky above the valley, the cowboy and the giant knew that the greatest adventure had been more than physical. It had been a journey of heart, wisdom, and trust. And that lesson, stronger than any cliff, any storm, or any mountain, would remain with them forever. The cowboy's journey through the valley had come to an end, but the story of courage, patience, and understanding would live on in the hearts of all who heard it. The small cowboy had walked with a giant, and together they had shown that true greatness is measured not by size or strength, but by heart, determination, and the ability to trust and learn from one another.